All right. Can everybody hear me? No. All right, great. So we're going to start, and these guys are going to get wired up while I'm speaking. Pete has never seen a microphone before. So good evening, Happy New Year, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're very excited to have with us this evening Jim Popkin, who's here to talk. Jim is here, of course, to talk about his very timely and revealing new book, Code Name Blue Wren, The True Story of America's Most Dangerous Female Spy and the Sister She Betrayed. Jim was a journalist for quite a few years, including the long and productive time at NBC News, where he created an award-winning investigative unit and served as its senior investigative producer. And he was at NBC when the 9/11 attacks happened, and like many journalists, got caught up in covering the immediate aftermath. So he wasn't able to pursue a story that broke just 10 days after 9/11 about the arrest of an American woman at the Defense Intelligence Agency caught spying for Cuba. But Jim remained very curious about the case for reasons that I'm sure he'll explain in a minute. And he kept returning to it long after the woman, who was named Ana Montes. She was a well-educated daughter of a U.S. military officer. Well after she pleaded guilty and was sentenced in 2002 to 25 years in prison. And Jim wrote a cover story about Ana for the Washington Post magazine nearly a decade ago. And now in his new book, he's able to put all the pieces together and answer such nagging questions about how Ana was able to operate as a spy at the Pentagon for 17 years, what secrets she divulged, why she did it, and how investigators finally managed to track her down. It's been said a number of times that Ana's the most dangerous spy that most folks have never heard of, and she was definitely very skilled at her craft, very efficient and deceptive, and also devastating. And Jim will go into, what she was guilty of. But the story that he tells is not just one of espionage. It's also a sad family tale because Ana betrayed not only her country, but more personally her family. Her brother and sister-in-law were FBI agents, and her only sister, Lucy, worked for the Bureau as a Spanish language analyst for a while, assisting in uncovering spies in the United States. Talk about a well-timed book. Ana was briefly in the news again just last week. Having served 21 years and 3 months, she was freed from a federal prison in Texas last Friday and granted early release due largely to good behavior. Publishers Weekly has called Jim's book a must-read for espionage fans. Now, in conversation with Jim will be one of his former NBC colleagues. I'm sure he's familiar to many of you, Pete Williams, who covered the Justice Department and Supreme Court for the network for 29 years before retiring last July. And early in his career, Pete was a TV news reporter in Wyoming, where he grew up, and he came to Washington in the mid-1980s to work for then Congressman Dick Cheney. When Cheney became Defense Secretary, Pete was tapped as the Pentagon spokesman, which brought him to national prominence. And after that government stint, he returned to news reporting. So we're delighted to have both of them here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Jim Popkin and Pete Williams.
Publishers Weekly has said nothing about me, by the way. Jim, you look vaguely familiar to me, and the reason is that Jim and I actually worked together at NBC in the Washington Bureau, and we were working together when the 9/11 attacks happened, and that's one of the reasons why this spy case got really no attention at the time. The country and journalists were otherwise occupied. I want to go over 3 areas with you. Number 1 is what she did and how damaging it was. Number 2, I think, is the remarkable ability you had to add a lot of new detail in this book. I used to work at the Defense Department. You quoted people who worked in the Defense Intelligence Agency on the record by name. I think that's pretty astonishing. And then thirdly, Jim Popkin these days is a media consultant, and any of you considering writing a book and having somebody handle it, you might ask yourself, how was it that he managed to get his book to come out just as she was coming out of prison, which I think is a pretty good trick. But I want to ask, first of all, what were you doing in Ana Montes' apartment?
I don't know if my friend John is here. There he is. John Berdar is my college roommate and very close friend, and John used to own Ana's apartment. So as a young man in Washington, I spent a lot of time in John's condo, and after 9/11, as Pete said, I was aware of this story, but we really couldn't cover it, and John reached out to me and informed me that Ana Montes had bought his condo, and it's kind of stayed in my head, and it has always kind of given me a personal connection to this story.
So let's start talking about Ana Montes. What did she do for the United States government, and how good was she at doing it?
Ana was an analyst for the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is kind of the CIA for the U.S. military. And she was really good at her, let's call it her day job. She kind of kept her head down, worked hard. She worked right through lunch every day. And she was just very, very competent. She had carte blanche access to classified documents at DIA as a military analyst, and used that to great effect in her night job, let's call it.
Was she widely well regarded by the intelligence community?
As a matter of fact, she was. Sorry, we've had this shtick for a long time. Ana was promoted numerous times, got cash awards from DIA. She was considered among the very best in the military and at DIA. She became our nation's really leading expert on Cuba, especially regarding politics and the military, and was a real pro. She was also a very difficult person. She was known somewhat derisively as the Queen of Cuba, and didn't suffer fools, was the kind of person who would walk past you in a hallway and sometimes not even acknowledge you, could be very, very brusque with people and difficult. So she had fans, but she also had enemies.
But she was decorated, right? I mean, she got all sorts of awards from the director of the CIA and all sorts of senior government officials. Is there any suggestion, Jim, that the information that she was digging up for the government was wrong, that she was telling us stuff that wasn't true?
Mostly what she did was legit. Some folks believe, some officials believe, that there are a couple of documents that she created, including in 1998, an assessment of Cuba that went to the Secretary of Defense and then was reported to Congress. Some officials believe that she shaded the truth in that, in discounting Cuba's threat, particularly regarding their intelligence capabilities. But by and large, what she did as an analyst was reviewed by a large group of people, so it would be hard for her to put her thumb on the scale too many times.
So I want to play a little bit of audio here, and then I want you to tell us what it is. See how well it's going? Now, I don't know if you can make out any of those words. Those are numbers. That's a woman reading a series of numbers on a shortwave radio transmission. It sort of sounds like it's going to end soon. Okay. Trust me.
I was going to help you.
It goes until 9 p.m. So it sounds sort of like somebody announcing the Powerball winner for Cuba. But what is this, and why did it play a role in her case?
That's called a numbers broadcast. That is an actual recording of a woman in a sound studio in Havana, and she would read a series of 150 digits in Spanish. This is how the Cubans communicated with their spy network in the US and around the world. So Ana, what she would do, and by the way, this is a real DC story. Ana lived, as I mentioned, in Cleveland Park on Macomb Street and frequented this whole area. She would, from the safety and security of her condo on Macomb Street, she would listen to a shortwave radio, to these kind of broadcasts. And it would be on a loop, so you could hear it several times. And she would write down these numbers in Spanish and then type them into her Toshiba computer. And she had a program in there the Cubans had provided to decrypt these numbers. They're meaningless to anyone else. And if you had a shortwave radio, you might hear that and obviously not know what it is. So she would decrypt it, and that is how she got her message and her tasking orders for that week. She would typically listen twice a week to the shortwave radio and then communicate in person often with her handlers in Washington.
So you said she was an ace expert on Cuba for the United States government. For how much of that time was she, in fact, also spying for Cuba?
She was recruited by Cuba prior to working for the government, for the DIA, the military. Ana
She was a spy from day one?
Correct. She was with the Department of Justice first in the Freedom of Information Act office. She got her security clearance there, initial one. She went to graduate school at Johns Hopkins here in D.C., their program called SICE. And it was there that she met someone who brought her and introduced her to a Cuban intelligence agent. They got training in Havana together on how to be spies, kind of Spy 101. And at that point, the Cubans directed her and helped her to apply, and that included applying to DIA. So from the moment she stepped foot in DIA in 1985, she was already a fully committed and trained Cuban spy.
So how did she get what she was giving the Cubans? How did she get it out of the building? Because somebody must have noticed she was carrying out documents.
Ana, and one of the reasons that she was successful for nearly 17 years is she was careful. And that meant not carrying documents out of the building, with very few exceptions. She memorized. And in fact, I'm sure we're going to talk about her family, but parts of her family cooperated with me for the book. And they have Ana's books that were on the Macomb Street apartment in a house now in South Florida. And I was able to look through her books, which was interesting and maybe creepy to some of you. And one of her books is on improving your memory. After the fact, the CIA did an after-action report, and they talked to Ana, debriefed her extensively. These were psychologists with the CIA. And they learned that she had a good memory, not an amazing memory, but a good memory. But I believe that using this book and other techniques, she improved her memory. And therefore, every day for nearly 17 years, she memorized reams of classified documents, typed them at night, and was able to provide just, volumes of material to Cuba.
So the Cubans communicated with her via shortwave radio. How did she get what she was giving the Cubans to them?
She primarily put her information on discs and then would hand them off to a handler in restaurants, and they often went to Chinese restaurants in D.C., usually by a metro and in safe areas. She had a real fear of street crime here. She also met with her handlers on Caribbean islands on many occasions and in Cuba as well, both on unofficial trips to Cuba when she would sneak in wearing a wig and using a fake passport, and even on official sanctioned trips to Cuba on behalf of the DIA. She would get away from her colleagues and go and meet with her handlers in Havana, which is obviously risky.
Okay, you mentioned her family, so tell us about that. Where is she from? And tell us about her family.
Ana was born on a military base, a U.S. military base in Germany, but she came here as, I think, a 2-year-old. The family moved originally to Topeka, Kansas, and then to just outside of Baltimore. Her parents were born in Puerto Rico. Her father was a doctor who became a psychiatrist, a Freudian psychiatrist, which is fascinating, we can discuss. And her mother was a homemaker who then ended up working for the government, very bright, capable woman. Ana went to school, in high school in Towson, then went to UVA, and then, as I said, she went and got a degree, master's degree at SAIS.
So what did you discover about her past that you think led her to betray her country?
She was always politically liberal, but she really got radicalized during her junior year abroad in Madrid. She met, this is in the late 70s, she met and fell for an Argentinian student who was very politically radical, and there was a whole community was very anti-American and anti-authoritarian as well. So she kind of fell in with this crowd as a junior in college, and then at SAIS she was surrounded by a lot of like-minded folks. And keep in mind the context. This was the Reagan era. President Reagan was very combative, some would say, bullying in Central America. And she and many of her classmates really reacted against that.
There is some suggestion that she was abused by her father. Do you think that played a role, that it made her, hate authority?
I think so. I mean, it's hard to put her on the couch exactly, but in reading this classified document from the CIA psychologists, they certainly thought so. And just quick take on her father. Dr. Alberto Montes, really brilliant guy, first in his family to go to school, educated in the U.S. He could be very loving, and there's a lot of nice attributes to say about him, and the family will still make sure that I'm especially aware of that. However, he had a horrendous temper. He was abusive to his children, starting at age 5. He used a belt on them for any childlike transgression. The kids and his wife lived in fear of him. To the outside world, this was a successful, decent guy. He's a doctor after all, and he's walking around in his lab coat. He also was in the military. He ultimately retired as a colonel in the U.S. Army. So again, from the outside, he really seemed to be a respectable member of the community. At home, he had a horrendous temper. He beat the kids. He harmed his wife. His second marriage, I learned in the reporting of this book, I met his stepdaughter. In his second marriage, he repeated this behavior. He really, really frightened the children, and he also, one night, beat his wife as well. So, to answer your question, yes, I think Ana was heavily influenced by this. He represented to her authority in the U.S. Army. However, I will say that Lucy was raised the same way, Ana's sister. Lucy ultimately worked for the FBI, as did her brother Tito. They are patriotic, loyal Americans. They never decided to spy for Cuba.
So Lucy didn't just work for the FBI, though, did she? I mean, what was her job?
Lucy became a translator with the FBI out of the Miami field office of the FBI. She worked primarily drug cases for a long time, but then, amazingly, she was assigned to a unit dedicated to finding Cuban spies. She had no idea until Ana's arrest day that her sister was the greatest Cuban spy of all time.
Did Lucy think her sister was pretty weird?
Yes, to a fault. Lucy and Ana, as little girls, were really close, and Ana, as the older sister, took care of Lucy, took her to school, read to her. They had a very, very close relationship for a long time. It started to change in high school, by the time they were both in their professional careers, and Ana is now spying, she became very odd, taciturn, withdrawn, wouldn't share any information, personal information of any sort with her sister.
And you write about family gatherings where she would just sort of sit there and not say anything.
Yeah.
So they figured something was going on, but they just didn't know what it was.
They didn't know what it was, and Lucy, it was almost like gaslighting in a way. Lucy interpreted all this and just wondered, is it me? Am I doing something to cause this? And she was just confused, and it really harmed their relationship.
You and I have covered a lot of stories about spies for the government, and oftentimes they got paid. How much did the Cubans pay Ana Montes?
Ana was motivated by ideology, and she was a political spy. She almost never took money, unlike Robert Hansen at the FBI or Rick Ames, who really enriched themselves. Ana took essentially expenses, a couple $1,000s during her 17-year career.
So how damaging was her spying?
She is one of the most damaging spies in U.S. history, and I would argue the most damaging female spy.
And by the way, stop right there, if you would. How exceptional is it to have a woman spying against the United States for a foreign country?
Still very rare. There are statistics that say only about 9 or 10% in the modern era have any spies been women. So
and is that, I don't want to get ahead of the story here, but is that one of the reasons why maybe the government was slow to pick up on her, because they thought, well, she's a woman, she's not a spy?
To some extent. I mean, they're also basing this on the clues that they had provided to them, but yes, I think that was part of it.
Okay, you started to say that she did this strictly for ideological reasons, but how damaging was it?
She was very damaging for a couple reasons. Number one, she provided the true identities of Americans operating in Havana. These were likely CIA operatives who are overseas or maybe based solely in Havana. By providing their names, it obviously blows their cover. It's a dangerous little game to play. In one case, the Cubans said back to her, "Thank you so much. We were waiting for him," whoever his real name was, "with open arms." That was extremely damaging to whatever plans the U.S. had in Cuba. Secondly, she provided the names of hundreds of other Americans who were working on any Cuban matter, any Cuban intelligence matter. She also, just by virtue of 17 years of spying, just provided reams of classified information, again, that she'd memorized primarily. And then lastly, she also revealed the existence and provided details on a classified multi-billion-dollar stealth satellite system, Code Name Misty. Misty was used by the U.S. government to spy successfully on Russia, China, Iran, and our other adversaries. Ana learned about it. She got read into it. Very few people knew about it, even at DIA. She immediately passed that information to the Cubans, and it is believed that program never worked again, or never worked as well, because the Cubans have a long track record of selling or sharing information with the Russians and others.
So I have a few more questions to ask you, and then we'll invite questions from all of you, from the vast number of Jim Popkin fans here at Politics and Prose. But let's talk a little bit about how she was finally captured. What was it that gave her up? Did anybody, any of her colleagues at DIA, begin to think maybe she was a spy?
There was one who had some suspicion about her and brought it up with security officials there. And in fact, one of the heroes of this story is a DIA investigator named Scott Carmichael. Scott's written his own book about this from his perspective. It came out over a dozen years ago. Scott actually interviewed Ana because there was a lot of suspicion, but it never really went
Why
anywhere.
was there suspicion?
One of Ana's colleagues thought that she was poking her nose too much into meetings, trying to attend meetings that she shouldn't go to, and other odd behavior that just raised some red flags.
But it was Scott who interviewed her. Did anything come of that?
Not really. He had essentially closed the case, but it stayed in his head, and that became important later.
And why? What happened later?
Well, thank you for asking.
You're
me.
welcome.
Later, what happened is the NSA, the National
I don't
Security...
know why I agreed to do this.
By the way, he was my boss for 5 years, so this is an odd experience. Later, the NSA, the National Security Agency, got onto these Cuban communications that Pete played, and they learned how to decode them. Random numbers, but they learned how to decode them. They followed this, and they realized that there was a lot of conversation about a mysterious Agent S. And they were trying to obviously figure out who that is. They didn't know who that person was, but it was clear that Agent S worked at a pretty high level in the U.S. intelligence community. The NSA gathered these clues up and briefed the FBI. The FBI obviously is the organization that investigates espionage. The FBI took more than 2 years trying to figure this out. And based on the clues, they thought it was a man. They thought probably it's CIA. But the reality is they kind of spun their wheels for a long time. A very brave analyst at NSA, I interviewed her, and she goes under a pseudonym. I call her Elena in the book. She would not take no for an answer. She got very frustrated by the FBI that this wasn't going anywhere. She went behind the back of the FBI and found investigators at DIA, where coincidentally Ana worked, but she didn't know this at the time. She shared these clues with the DIA. Again, the FBI didn't know about this, and when they learned, they were not happy. The analyst, Elena, was threatened with being fired and being jailed over this, what they thought was a transgression. The DIA got these clues, entered them into their database, and in no time at all found Ana Montes' name on a list of other, basically, suspects. But Scott Carmichael was one of the investigators who got these clues, and he had interviewed Ana several years before. So her name pops up on this computer database, and he just said, we're televised, so I can't say what he said. But
words to the effect of "oh gosh."
Yes, yes, and he basically figured this out very quickly. Obviously, went to corroborate it. Brought this information to the FBI. They fought him for quite a while. Ultimately, agreed that there was something there. They opened a full field investigation in late 2000. And to skip ahead, in May 2001. They got special court authority to enter Ana's apartment, John Berdar's former apartment, and they searched it. It was a black bag job. They searched it. They found her shortwave radio, and they found her Toshiba laptop. They copied the laptop, closed the door, didn't even disturb the dust, and a couple days later, the FBI investigators learned that she had been communicating back and forth with Cuba. Her one biggest mistake was not properly deleting her files. And there's hilarious back and forth. It's like the Cuban version of a Genius Bar, where they're saying to her, Ana, please, well, actually not Ana, Agent S, please remember to go into this file and hit this. And she ignored their tech instructions, left some of these files on the laptop, and that is really what convicted her.
Did she sense that they were onto her before she was arrested?
Not really. After the fact, she in debriefing, she told the FBI that she heard them once while she was being followed all through Northwest D.C. But if she did, it begs the question, why didn't she not leave then?
So I think that tells the story of her pretty well. I want to talk a little bit about your reporting for this book, because I must say, you know, despite the fact that I know you and have long respected you, I think it's an extraordinary reporting job. For one thing, how did you get those people at the Defense Intelligence Agency, who are not the most valuable folks around, to talk to you on the record?
I have the advantage of time here, because I really have been looking at this for 15 years. The crimes took place starting in 1985. It's been a long time. I interviewed people and then re-interviewed them. They loosened up a little bit over time.
And you also got extraordinary cooperation from members of her family. Is that right?
Yes. I want to give just a quick shout out to Lucy Montes. I mentioned Lucy joined the FBI. She had no idea what was going on with her sister. This has been a really emotional week for Lucy. Lucy is so distraught with what her sister did. The whole family is. However, this is her sister. She still loves her, flaws and all, and she's trying to figure out now with this new part of her life. Ana just got out of prison on Friday, how to be a sister if she can.
Were they at all sympathetic to what she did?
No.
Did they understand it at any level?
No.
Okay. When she was sentenced, Ana Montes, I'm looking at the transcript of her sentencing hearing, and here's what she told the judge. This is Ana Montes. I obeyed my conscience rather than the law. I believe our government's policy toward Cuba is cruel and unfair, profoundly unneighborly, and I felt morally obligated to help the island defend itself from our efforts to impose our values and our political system on it. She just got out of prison after, 21 years or so. Did all those years in prison change her mind?
Not at all. So Ana just yesterday released an incredible statement through her lawyer. She is not apologetic. She said that she's going to try to keep a low profile and probably will not do any interviews. But remarkably to me, she criticized U.S. policy. She immediately went on the attack regarding the U.S. embargo with Cuba. And it was a very fiery, aggressive statement for someone who's just out of prison after 21 years.
So one of the things that you say in your book is that it would be a mistake to think of the Cuban government as sort of feckless when it comes to intelligence. I mean, we don't think of Cuba as having a highly advanced intelligence capability, but what does the Ana Montes story tell you about that?
The Cubans are really good at this. They were trained by the Soviets. They don't have a lot of money, but they're scrappy and competent, and Ana Montes is the best example of that. I mean, just think of what they did. They essentially meet a young woman in graduate school. They like what they hear from her publicly. They introduce her via another student there named Marta Velázquez, and introduce her to a Cuban agent. And then they wait while this young woman works her way up the ranks for 17 years. It's remarkable, and it really says a lot about the patience and the creativity of their intelligence service.
Even though the tradecraft was very basic.
Correct.
Listening
Right.
on a shortwave radio. Now, the third thing I want to talk to you is about the timing of the release of your book. Bill Harlow, who is the best spokesman the CIA ever had, writes a blog about intelligence matters. He calls it exquisitely timed book. And by the way,
Go on, Bill.
in his review, he gives it the highest rating of that website, 4 trench coats. For real, 4 trench coats. So how do you get the publishing world, which is not known for being, fast on its feet, to have your book come out as she's getting out of the slammer? How did you do that? Or these trade secrets you can't really...
No. I mentioned that I have been collecting string on this for 15 years. So one would think that maybe 14 years ago, I might have decided, yes, I'm going to write a book. I decided about 2 years ago to write a book. I was fortunate enough to find a great publisher, and it all came together. But it was a very aggressive...
Well, it didn't just all come together. You must have made it come together like that.
It was an aggressive timetable, and I had the advantage of having done so many interviews over the years for the Post piece and other work, and so I had a kind of a starting place. But it was quite a scramble, and I wrote in about 7-8 months.
And this all started, this is not the first time you've written about this case. I should have said this at the beginning. Mm-hmm. You wrote about this years ago, right?
10 years ago for the Washington Post magazine.
And that sort of got you, did at the time you finished that article, did you say, okay, well, that's it for this, I'm not going to do a book, or when did you decide to do the book?
Truth be told, I mean, I wrote that, and Thankfully, it got optioned right away, and so a lot of
What does that mean?
For a possible movie or a TV series. So a lot of the ongoing work was in support of that, which goes on to this day.
So fingers still crossed, huh?
Indeed.
Okay. All right, it's your turn, ladies and gentlemen. If you have questions for Jim Popkin about his book, Code Name Blue Wren. By the way, what does that mean, Code Name Blue Wren?
Code Name Blue Wren is the code name that the FBI gave to the case, and I was happy to see Ana, in her picture that was released yesterday, is wearing a blue blouse, which was good branding for me. Wow. Yeah.
All right, if you have questions, this is being streamed. It's also being recorded on C-SPAN, and it's going live to Havana. If you have questions, we would ask if you would come to the microphone, please, which is right over there, because otherwise the folks watching the streaming feed will not be able to hear what you're saying. Yes, sir.
If she were to read your book, what would you hope her takeaway would be?
That she wouldn't ever attack me. No, the book is very harsh on her, and I did see, after I wrote this Washington Post piece 10 years ago, she wrote a letter to a friend who may be here tonight. We'll see. Her friend Mimi may be here. Mimi, hi. This is Ana Montes' good friend from Madrid, from their junior year abroad. She's fascinating, and she's quoted in the book. Ana commented on the article in letters and was not a big fan. Her view on this is, none of this is about me. I'm not interesting. Focus on why I did this and what is wrong with U.S. policy. I feel like there's a place for that, but obviously that's a very, very small part of the story.
Did you try to interview Ana Montes for the book?
I didn't, because she's under such harsh conditions. She was not allowed to, and right now, even
it was
now,
part of a judge's sentence, right?
Correct.
She's not allowed to.
Even now, she's on probation, and it would be extremely difficult to interview her.
Do you know where she is?
Right now?
Yeah.
She's in Puerto Rico now. Yeah.
All right. Other questions for Jim Popkin? Please step right up to the microphone.
So in the book, you make a statement about there's information and documents and things that had not previously been released, or information that hadn't previously come to light. So I guess my question is two parts. Is everything in the book at this point now declassified? And if not, did you at any point have any reservations about potentially releasing information that could, I mean, even if they're older programs, possibly compromise national security? Like you said, you made a statement earlier about you talked to people so many times over the years that people kind of got more comfortable or loosened up a little bit, but that's not declassifying.
Correct. There is information, and it's a great question. There's information that I report on that is classified. I mean, I have a CIA 10-page report on the case that quotes her extensively. This is a journalism question. Is the value of the material worth the risk, essentially? I don't feel like there's anything that I report on that would jeopardize troops or national security in any way, but there may be folks at DIA and other agencies that disagree with that.
And in fact, the MISTY satellite system had been the subject of some congressional debate, and it was ultimately canceled well before your book came out.
Correct, and it's been reported as well. The connection to Ana Montes had not been reported.
Yeah, that's the fact of the existence of the stealth system, but not the idea that she had perhaps been the first person to give it up.
Correct.
Other questions for Jim Popkin? Yes, sir.
So, as we listen to this and wait for the movie, is there kind of do you need a sexual component or a romance component to kind of bring this to the big screen? The rendition of this is kind of sterile from the standpoint, it seems like she only did this job, did her day job, night job, no personal life, nothing going on, no interaction with other people. It's like, did you get more insights into how so it's a two-part question.
Yes. So Ana had romances, several that I talk about when she was in college. She had a number of guys over the years. There was someone at the end, right when she was arrested, who she really fell in love with, who she really wanted to marry. At a certain point at the end, we haven't talked about the psychological stress of all this, but it was extremely difficult for her, and she had a lot of psychological issues. She wanted to get out of the spying game, and
What was difficult for her? Maintaining this double existence, you mean?
Yeah, and it's lonely. This kind of spying is lonely. When she saw her handlers, she could share, and she could talk to them about her frustrations. But who else could she go to? Certainly not her family. And so it was a very, very lonely existence for her, and she did suffer with a lot of stress towards the end. And as I said, she wanted to get out of the game, and she couldn't. To Craig's other question, she also at one point, just out of frustration, went to the Cubans and told them that this was difficult. It's hard to meet anyone, and they introduced her to someone. Shall we say
Here or in Havana?
It was in one of the islands actually, and it didn't work out. She found him to be too hairy, which I mean, frankly, who among us? But.
Yeah, clearly Ana was opposed to U.S. policy in Cuba deeply, and that's not a novel thing in this city or in this country.
Right.
And you mentioned that they were for ideological reasons that she did. What was the ideology? I mean, maybe that's a distinction without a difference, but I think there is a difference there. But what was the ideology that you have in mind?
Well, first of all, again, think of the Reagan era and what Reagan was doing, his policy in Nicaragua and El Salvador. She thought that was wrong. In general, she believes that the U.S. has just been a bully wherever it could be, and many reasonable people agree with her. She feels like, to this day, that she had really almost the need to do what she did, that she was in a special position once she was at DIA, and she felt like she had a moral obligation to help the Cuban people. That's as far as I can take it. I mean, she's written about this, and I will give her this. I mean, she didn't run from this, and even at her sentencing, she didn't know what the outcome would be. In front of Judge Urbina here in Washington, she made these statements boldly in supporting her position.
Some other questions here, but briefly about the sentence. It was a 25-year sentence. She got out early because of good behavior. But how does that sentence compare to other spy cases? Did she get off easy?
Well, I won't say easy, because the prison she was in was really miserable. So she did 21 hard years. But if you look at other spies, Robert Hansen, Rick Ames, and there's also another spy who was at SAIS. He was a professor and also a Cuban spy, last name Myers. They all got life sentences. They're serving time at Supermax in Colorado. Ana is out now. She's 65 years old. She can have a life and rebuild her life. These other spies didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the intelligence community, both contractors and employees, generally have to take a lie detector test every year, every other year. How did she beat that, or was that discussed at all?
No, thank you. First of all, when she came to DIA in 1985, at that time, DIA and many other agencies did not require polygraphs. So she did not have a polygraph. She was allowed in...
Didn't require them for new employees?
For new employees, correct. She had one polygraph, I believe it was in 1994. She passed it. One of the first things that she did in Havana during her first visit there, she demanded that they teach her how to defeat a polygraph. And it worked. And there's a lot of criticism of polygraphs in general. And and so maybe if she had taken 10 polygraphs, she would have passed every one.
But one of the interesting things is oftentimes one of the indicators that somebody is spying is suddenly there's a Jaguar in the driveway. She had none of those indicators were none of those giving off bad signs.
Thank you. You mentioned that she had a sort of special interest in the Misty program, that she learned about its existence separately from her handlers, or sounds like separately from the Cubans. So she took it upon herself to become knowledgeable about this. And it sounds like this program was not particularly focused on Cuba, but on other countries. What fraction of the work that she did for Cuba was kind of related to Cuban-U.S. relationships, and what fraction was information that they felt they could make use of by selling to other countries and so forth? Do you have a good sort of measure of that?
I don't have a measure, but she was towards the end of beginning to end of her career. She was a Cuba expert and a Cuba analyst. So obviously she had access to loads of information about Cuba. But in that position, and just because she was so senior, and by the way, just right before she was arrested, she had been assigned. It was a very big deal, and almost a promotion to the CIA. She was going to be stationed at the CIA. Because of her seniority, she was a GS-14. She had access to all kinds of information that didn't only involve Cuba. And Misty is a good example. She was read into that, and it was such a restricted program that very few people knew about it, and there are extremely accurate records kept about who does get read into it. So it was after the fact. It was fairly easy to ascertain that she knew about that, and that is a good example because that program was helpful way beyond Cuba, and so her essentially blowing it had a larger ripple effect.
Right.
I see the former spokesman for the FBI, Mike Corton, here tonight. I said Harlow was the best spokesman for CIA. Mike was the best for the FBI, retired now. But as he knows so well, oftentimes the timing of an arrest is based on all sorts of different factors. You might want to let the person go on and do it for a while, or feed them bad information and see who else is involved. Is there anything interesting about the timing of her arrest?
The DIA, starting in late 2000, knew that Ana was a suspected spy and that there was a lot of information on her. They kept her in place. And the DIA director at the time, Admiral Thomas Wilson, I interviewed him for the book, and he was aware of the risk. He kept a spy at DIA, continuing to hoover up classified information, but in his view, it was worth it for the risk and to allow the FBI to continue its investigation. They were hoping that they would find on a meeting with a Cuban handler, passing a disc. That would be obviously a slam dunk. It never happened. To jump ahead to 9/11, 9/11 happens, and there are two amazing things. I mean, first of all, the Pentagon is hit that day, and it hit an area where it was a DIA office. So Admiral Wilson was in the FBI, heard the planes go by, and now, unfortunately, there are DIA employees who are victims. He's dealing with that, and the DIA, keep in mind, what is their job after 9/11? They're our nation's war planners. They're responsible for coming up with the plan and analyzing the military, the Taliban, etc. So this is an extremely busy person. He realized, now it's post 9/11, and I have a Cuban spy working on my staff. Papers came across his desk saying that she was about to gain access to our bombing targets in Afghanistan. And that was done by folks at DIA who had no idea that she was under suspicion. When Admiral Wilson saw that, he said, "This has been fun, and we're done now." And he contacted the FBI and said, she must be arrested by Friday, September 21st, 2001. And that is the day she was arrested.
Yes. Next question for Jim
Well,
Popkin.
Nobody behind me. So
All right,
I'll
go ahead. You have
double
another
up.
one.
Yeah, I was just, is there anything you can tell us in more detail about the information relevant to Cuba that she was, what kinds of things were they interested in for 17 years?
Sure. A lot of it was very, for most folks, very in the weeds, but her job, she's basically a writer in a sense. So every day she is writing about Cuba's military capabilities. Literally down to how many tanks they have and where locations are and training. So she had access to that, and Cuba wanted to know that. Cuba wanted to know what would happen if the U.S. ever bombed or tried to attack Cuba. Where would it take place? And we do this, these exercises all the time, and she provided that. Fidel Castro was, for very good reason, was paranoid about what would happen with the U.S. military. So he and his administration really valued what she was providing.
Did she ever meet Castro?
She didn't. She never met Castro. This is according to what she said after the fact. But she did meet senior officials in the intelligence world there, and she got a medal once. She was honored by the Cubans, but this is a medal that they present. Take a look at it. Okay, now we're taking it back because she couldn't take it home. It didn't go in her luggage.
Did there ever come a time when the Cuban government wanted to exchange, we just had all this attention about prisoner exchanges with the Russians. Was there ever a time when the Cubans tried to get her back to Cuba in exchange for somebody else?
During the Obama administration, President Obama's staff considered this for a while, and there was talk about possibly exchanging her, allowing her out early in exchange for Americans who are in Cuba and obviously impossible for the U.S. to access. It never happened. The Cubans, right after she was arrested, they put out a statement in support of Ana, which was very unusual. Generally, spy services don't say anything. And they essentially acknowledged that Ana had helped the Cubans over the years. It was a little hat tip to her after her conviction. But after that point, they really haven't said much. It's fascinating on Facebook. There's a big affinity group, several of them, in support of Ana Montes, both in Cuba and even more so in Puerto Rico.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm sure that Ana told the authorities that her sister was not involved in any way in this, but it seems like that would be hard for them to believe, given that she was at the FBI trying to find Cuban spies. And did that cause any real problems for her sister, and how did she survive that?
That is such a wonderful question. So let me just talk briefly about Lucy. Lucy, on September 21st, is tapped on the shoulder. She's in Miami and asked to come to her supervisor's office. She's walked there, and she's thinking as she's walking, this must be about 9/11, because the FBI in Miami, right, Mike, was very involved with the 9/11 investigation. She just assumed that's what it was. They sit her down, and a couple officials say, "We have some news for you. Your sister was just arrested in Washington. Your sister is a Cuban spy." Lucy was absolutely shocked. She didn't really believe it at first, but one of the first emotions that she felt was relief. Relief because now she understood why her sister had become so distant and didn't share anything with her. That was just an incredible moment for her, and it was repeated in Atlanta with her brother Tito, who was an FBI special agent, with a badge and a gun, and his wife Joan, who was also an FBI special agent. They had the same conversations. They, unlike Lucy, to this day is very, very angry at her sister, but because Joan and Tito were agents, it was hard for them to recover from this and to ever offer any kind of acceptance whatsoever to her.
But back to the gravamen of the question, though. Did it cause any trouble? Were there people in the Bureau who said, come on, you must have known this?
Yeah. So Lucy was never polygraphed, but she was questioned thoroughly by the FBI. I had the chance to talk to her former boss in Miami. He actually did want to polygraph her, but other folks within the Bureau resisted. But keep in mind, the FBI had been keeping a close eye on Ana for a very long time, and listening in on her calls. They knew an enormous amount about Ana Montes, and were confident that Lucy and the family had nothing to do with this.
So you said you worked on this book how long? 15 years?
Well, research for 15 years.
Okay, so how many people did you talk to? How many people did you interview?
Well over 100.
And what kind of cooperation did you get from DIA, from the Bureau, from other intelligence agencies?
The FBI and the FBI investigators were tremendously helpful in this. The DIA as well. And, the DIA even helped me more recently, even knowing some of that parts of this clearly represented an intelligence failure for them. And they were extremely cooperative.
Well, does that surprise you that they were happy to help you tell about their failures?
Not really, and again, I think it's because a lot of time has passed, and they're willing to be a little more open about this.
And it's a lesson, right?
Yes, exactly.
Last question.
So you have, as a book writer question, plenty of people want to write books, think they're going to write books. You've been a writer for a long time. How was this different in writing the book, compared to all the other writing that you've done your entire career? What surprised you about maybe how easy it was, or how difficult it was, or how long it took?
Is this your first book?
This is my first book, yeah. I've only ever written long articles, and this was quite a challenge. I was talking to Brad earlier, because Brad's written a lot of books. It's hard to, it's so long, you want to make sure that the flow is there, so you have to keep going back and reading the beginning, which is just very time consuming. But this has been a passion and an interest of mine since John told me about it all the way back in 2001. And I guess that is, the message. If you're gonna spend time on something or write a book, make sure you really enjoy the topic.
Well, I see a couple of people that I would just like to call out here. Before Jim came to NBC News and we were hitched up together, he worked at the NBC affiliate here, WRC, Channel 4, and I see a lot of folks from Channel 4 here tonight, so a shout out to them. And I see, if you've listened carefully to Jim's speech, you know that he's not from around here. A slight New Jersey accent, and I see there's a considerable New Jersey contingent here as well tonight, a cheering section. So how about a hand for Jim Popkin?
And let me just say this evening was a great example of when you have two broadcast pros up here talking. Now, copies of Jim's book are available at the checkout desk. He'll be up here delighted to sign. If you have a copy that you want signed, line up to the right of the table. Help our staff by folding up the chairs, and thanks again for